Welcome to the Everlasting Podcast, the ultimate destination for CEOs, founders, and changemakers like you, who are not only satisfied with success, but striving to create everlasting fulfillment. I'm your host, Nico van der Venne, entrepreneur and fervent believer in the power of everlasting fulfillment. Do you find yourself pondering what's beyond success? Have you ever thought about everlasting fulfillment? If so, you're in the right place. Here, we don't just talk about business, we talk about the journey from success to fulfillment. We'll engage in insightful conversations with distinguished CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, and experts in various fields each week. We'll uncover the secrets to creating a sustainable business, transcending societal norms, and building everlasting fulfillment. So if you're ready to go beyond profits and accolades to create everlasting fulfillment in life and business, stick around, because the Everlasting Podcast is the strategic insight you've been waiting for.
So, welcome back to the podcast. I have a very interesting guest today, Cédric Herrogodts from the company called FlowSparks. He will probably explain to you a little bit later on what the details are and what their preoccupation is. But as usual, we are here to inspire you and tell you about what kind of happens with a CEO's life when he comes into that role and what happens during the role. So, Cédric, hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nico. Thank you, and thank you for having me on this podcast.
I am very happy to welcome you. Thank you for taking your time, because I know that your schedule is stamped. It's really full. It's always exciting to get somebody a little corner in that agenda to see if you have time to do an interview. So I'm very happy and very grateful for your being here. So I would say introduce yourself to the listeners of the podcast.
Okay, sure. So my name's Cédric Herrogodts. I'm the CEO of FlowSparks. I've got two small kids at home, so if you can hear them, we just discussed this before we started the recording, that if you hear them here, sorry up front. So I've been working at FlowSparks since 2012, so that's already more than 11 years. So it's been a long journey, and I'm excited to talk about the journey today here in this podcast.
Cool, 11 years. Cool. That's already, and these days, that's a long time in a company.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah.
Must sound like a good company in any case. So, Cédric, I've got a couple of questions I really want to ask you, and they're a bit quirky at some points, and as always, that makes it a little bit more interesting. So, if you could choose an unexpected listener for this podcast, who would it be, and why, of course?
Okay, that's a hard question. So, well, maybe if I could choose an unexpected listener, I'd transport the conversation to maybe a future where artificial intelligence and advanced robotics and other groundbreaking technologies have become integral parts of our daily lives, but also in terms of learning, because of course that's the industry I'm in. And there I would imagine, let's say, a traditional learning expert that never really believed that everyone would be able to effectively transfer knowledge digitally, because it's still a struggle. Learning experts, some of them, not all of them, of course, still believe it's an expertise that it's hard to transfer to, let's say, the public. And then why would I choose that person? I think the main reason I would choose that person is because, from my point of view, I strongly believe that in general, the progress of humanity, if you look at history, is always linked to the speed of which knowledge can be transferred. Right? If you look at writing, you've got the internet. I think was a very big change. But I think if you go back even further, the invention of writing and capability of people to write has been a big change. Right. So, and I think for that person, or those persons, I think it would be like putting them in a time travel capsule. And it would, shedding light on the days when AI was the hot topic, which it is today.
Indeed.
While for them, probably it's just another tool. Like now we look at a smartphone like it's normal, right? It's nothing special anymore. It's normal.
Indeed.
And I think for them, it would be interesting to see and to hear people like us discussing dreams that we have today in terms of what technology would enable us to do. in my industry, and of course in my role at FlowSparks, I think is that we want to use technology to make fast knowledge transfer accessible and mostly applicable to everyone, right? So, if I could address that person specifically, I would say welcome to the moment in time when the businesses were still navigating the waters of incorporating smart tech and AI into everything and trying to evolve ourselves. I think that's the mostly the type of person I would hope that would listen in the future to this podcast, and why.
Cool. That's really jumping ahead. I'm actually, honestly, I think in the current way things are moving, it wouldn't be that far into the future that you would talk about right now. These people might be here very soon.
I'm kind of hoping it's very soon, and I think as I really believe that AI, but also other technologies, right? It's not only AI, although it's the hot topic today.
Of course, yeah.
Everything goes faster, so it could be very soon. But on the other side, we need to stay realistic, and humanity in general have dreamt it. So I think when I was still a kid, they forecasted that in 2020 or 2025, I don't remember, we would have settlements on Mars and on the moon. So sometimes we're a bit optimistic as well. So we'll see how fast it really goes. But I think it would be it would just be interesting to meet that person as well today, which of course I know is impossible. I'm not dreaming too much, but it would be just nice to hear their tips on how we eventually manage to leverage these new technologies like AI to its fullest potential, because today everyone's talking about generative AI, like generating images, generating video, text, of course, with ChatGPT. But I would also like to know more about practical stuff, right? I'm not really sure how to.
The little bits and bytes.
The little bits and bytes, I'm hoping that by that time, and whether it's in 1 year, 2 years, 20 years, I don't know, whether they've cracked the code on, if I, again, project it on my industry, is have they cracked the code on how they can enable experts within a company that are not specifically learning related, that they can share their know-how to their colleagues efficiently. And I'm not saying just putting up a SharePoint and everyone can upload documents, right? Effective trainings that have impact on users following that training, that have some didactical principles inside of them. Those things, I know that the technology exists today because that's what we already do. It's improving, of course, and AI is making it way more effective than it's ever been. But there still remains the question about culture, organizing it in a company. How did they stimulate people to do this? How did big companies organize this? Because you see a lot of companies trying it and starting to do this today. But I'm really, and I know maybe it's very linked to my industry, right? Because that's where I'm focused on now. In the future, I would like to learn from them what are the lessons learned, right? What are the key tricks, the tips, things you can, because probably like a lot of things, it's not that complicated. Someone just needs to find the solution and the formula. And of course, and I think but I'm quite sure it will happen, but I'd like to hear from that person as well that embracing AI is the way to go, because still you've got, I think you've got different types of people in companies these days. Some of them are really embracing AI, but some of them are also a little bit afraid of the risks, what's going to happen in the future, what happens with information. And others making promises, but can we 100% trust these promises? It's still, the embracing of the technology is not fully there yet. And I'm quite sure that someone in the future will tell us, embrace it because it's coming anyway. So
that's usually it, isn't it? It's the same story when the PC came into the household. It's like, this machine will never be working or whatever, and a lot of speculation. I remember reading an article about the television that way, that people were scared of our screen in our living room that we're just watching as pleasure, where they were saying this is going to be used for propaganda and all those wonderful words that end up in a negative way, where in the end, as a kid, I found it one of the best babysitters that you can find. There you go.
Actually true. I can relate to that one. It's
There you go. I wouldn't put AI in the role of a babysitter yet. There's no arms and safety and all of that. It's used for very specific reasons, of course. Well, it's like you mentioned ChatGPT. I am an avid user of ChatGPT and a lot of stuff. And what I found in building companies and working with customers, sometimes it's difficult to express what you have in your mind. There are certain things that you want to explain to somebody, and you're there to help them, and you should really see that they could use that information. And that's where I use ChatGPT to translate what happens in my mind, to structure it, and then publish it to a more broader audience. And that's what I found amazing as well, that I'm going to skip back to one thing that you just mentioned. Is you're talking a lot about knowledge and learning and training. And I think for the listeners, it's like, what's FlowSparks? Basically, you're talking about that's your industry. And if I look at what you guys have been doing with AI, for instance, integrating it into your own software, it's starting to become a part of the story, and people are seeing it as a tool within that tool. So it's integrating, really subtly. It's not bam, like, I know that AI, specifically ChatGPT, was launched the 30th of November, 2022, if I remember correctly. It's my birthday, so I remember very vividly. and last year, November, it was 1 year, and the explosion that it caused is enormous. But now it's kind of, the hype is simmering down a little bit, and it's just appearing. It's something that's there. You open your Outlook these days, and there is a solution from Microsoft that's just there. And in the end, there was always something there already. And that's what I find it funny when people are saying, oh no, AI is going to make lose jobs and blah, blah, blah. I'm 45 years old, and I've heard these stories over and over and over again in other technologies. Robots in car factories, they're going to take over all the jobs. No, there's still some human factor that's needed there. And that's one of the things that I've noticed also in the learning industry, to go and jump into your industry at this point, is that how do you transmit knowledge? It is the person that transmits that knowledge that also needs to have the skills to be able to transmit that knowledge. Adding your tool there, which I will let you explain what the story is there later on, just trying to make a point where if one can be added to the other instead of seeing separately, like, I mean, AI is an added value instead of something new, then you can create something a lot more effective and long lasting. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing my services, to make everything a lot more long lasting, because these days a lot of stuff is just short term and this and that. But if you have a knowledge transfer to be done, and you put that in FlowSparks within your environment, and it's a little bit added with AI on how explaining and how you should structure it and this and that, it's going to be a lot better than just say, okay, you're going to put it into a system and you're just going to launch it. And the there is dependent on the person only.
Yeah, and it reverts a bit back to my story of my unexpected listener in the future there, where I said, okay, because if you look now, and then I'll explain to the listener, of course, what we do as well. But I just want
to let's keep him a little bit excited,
Yeah, and just jump into what you just said is that if you look at content, so we're talking about digital trainings, right? So in terms of knowledge transfer, that's what we do. So if you look at creating these online trainings, of course, you need to know the content, right? So it's hard to give a training about the code of conduct, let's say, if you don't know the code of conduct. You need to know what it's about to be able to give a training about the code of conduct. But that's just the expertise about the topic. That's one part. But then indeed, like you just said, there's also a lot of knowledge needed to be able to transfer knowledge, meaning in terms of instructional design, right? Didactics. What are typical mechanisms that you need to incorporate in a digital training to make sure that people remember something, that they're able to apply something in reality? It needs to work technically, and it needs to look good because we're used to all these fun apps and nice, perfectly designed applications on our phones, even, right? Not even on PCs anymore, also on your phones. So people expect the same user friendliness. It needs to work on any device, all these things, which makes it really hard for, let's say you've got someone in someone in a factory, right? He's a safety manager. He should know everything about safety, right? So probably he knows all about safety and all the regulations and all the rules and all the exceptions that can or cannot be made. But then the question is, just like you said, right? How do you transfer this? Okay, you can use tools, and tools could be a tool like FlowSparks, could be ChatGPT, could probably be the internet, could be whatever. But a tool is just a tool, right? And I still love the expression, a fool with a tool is still a fool, right? And I think it's just the same with AI, right? I love AI. I embrace it completely. We've incorporated it in our own software. I use it as well quite often, actually, because I'm not the best writer, and ChatGPT apparently is a very good writer, way better than I am. So it also helps you to get inspired, right? And that's even that is an issue when it comes to creating learnings, because knowing all the rules and just listing them up for a person, just if you go back to school, right, the time you were at school, if you had a teacher in front of the class who was just saying, rule 1, this is rule 2, this is rule 3.
I'm falling asleep right now.
It's really hard for yourself as well, because you need to be a more advanced learner, let's say, to project it into practical cases, reality. What does this mean for me? What does this mean in real life situations? And so, okay, the ideal situation in digital learning is, okay, create these cases, have people interfere with the content, let them do exercises. But you can already imagine if you ask, again, I'll stick to the same example, a safety manager's list of the rules, he probably has these rules already written down in a document.
Yeah, indeed.
In a PowerPoint, that's easy for him, and just explaining what they mean. But if you ask him, create 10 scenarios, real life practical cases that could happen with a good question, and then per question, let's say you want to have 3 answers, one being okay, a better, and the best nuanced answer in this situation, and you want to get some feedback and insights. Although the person has all this knowledge, this, depending on the person, could scare him, because this is a lot of work. You need to be creative, writing down. There's writer's block, which, again, if I projected on myself, I would be one of those people that would think, oh, now I need to sit down, block my calendar to be able to get creative. And getting creative, if you want to be creative, it's harder to be creative, right? So
when it's forced, it's not that easy.
And this is all about embracing these technologies. And in my case, what I use AI a lot for is these types of things, right? And it's also the way we've incorporated it in our own software. I'm not saying it's a solution that's going to do everything for you. We see it more for now, and again, what happens in a couple of years, we don't know, right? But for now, as more as a co-author, someone helping you, like Microsoft has its co-pilot, right? Because it helps you, it gets you inspired, it gives you a quick first draft, and that's what you said before. I strongly believe in they've lost human touch.
Yeah.
Because how smart AI is, or that we think he is, it's still a machine, right? So sometimes nuances, the human touch to it makes the difference. So I think especially when it comes to creativity and making things funny, right?
Yeah, especially that. And I've tried running through some dad jokes on ChatGPT, and it is not funny. Sorry, there's no humor there.
The funny thing about it as well is that sometimes it's quite good, but sometimes it's ridiculous. The human would make the distinction very easily, while I think for machines, again, for now, so I'm always quite cautious in.
And the evolution is quick. Huh? It's a lot of stuff.
It's the same with image generation. I remember when we did the first tryout in our own tool. We're using DALL-E, by the way, to generate images. I think the first working prototype was, I think, somewhere in August, September last year that we had. And I saw it, and like, okay, text-based, and that was all quite good. But then when you saw the images, I'm like, most people are like, okay, it's cool to experiment with it, but it's not usable. People have 6 fingers on one hand, and then someone has an eye that's like 20 centimeters higher than the other eye. Very strange things are happening with faces.
They're creating aliens.
Yeah. While the crazy thing is that if you look at even the things that I think 2 or 3 months later, the quality went up so quickly. So I think it's hard to predict, or it's hard for me to predict, at least, to say what it will be able to do in a couple of years, if it keeps going in this space.
Indeed, yeah. And my grandfather always told me, use the right tool for the right, the right wrench for the right bolt, and that's where it kind of comes out to, that you're actually adding something on the pile of all the tools that we already have software wise. Because I remember, I've done trainings myself, given a lot of trainings, and I love e-learnings. There's a lot of people who kind of are off on those things, because how is it possible that you spend 3/4 of an hour keeping interest in an e-learning? And that's one of the things that I've noticed about FlowSparks, for instance, that you guys have a lot of different possibilities to change the way you present something, and it's the same story where you get that creativity is by actually doing it first, trying out, usually
creating interaction.
And the same thing with AI. It's the way it also learns. So if we make those mistakes, it learns from our mistakes, and that's what I find amazing. Of course, it's generative, so it's going to just predict the next word that it has to say.
Yeah.
But there are others that already skipped the generative story, and they start to think, and that's more or less the kind that I'm like, the movie I, Robot?
Yeah.
It's kind of, okay, I don't want to see their chest turn red. But of course, on the other side, there's a lot of stuff that has happened in the past in humanity, which now we look at as very dark situations, but they made us evolve a lot quicker. I'm not going to resound towards Terminator stories and stuff like that. We're not going to do that. But I know there's a lot of failure is the part of evolution that we need. So as a human, we're going to be confronted with those things. Now, if I look at the story of FlowSparks, you're telling me you've been there 11 years now. I think FlowSparks is a little bit older than the 11 years that you're talking about. So in recent times, you've become the CEO of the environment, and I wanted to ask you, what are the things that you've come confronted with, challenges that you've met in your story to becoming CEO or being CEO? I think there's a lot of people who sometimes want to know what's the life like being a CEO.
Okay, yeah. Maybe I think, especially for the listener, it's maybe better that I start, because we've talked a lot about FlowSparks. I know you've encountered FlowSparks in your professional career, so you know what it is. But I would hope that everyone already knows what it is. But probably
I thought it was obvious, like it's in Microsoft.
It's like Coca-Cola. It's similar. No. FlowSparks. Maybe to explain quickly on what the company does. So we're a Belgian-based company. Headquarters is in Ghent. We also have offices in Antwerp. We also have offices in the Netherlands, in Eindhoven, and we're a software company in the e-learning industry, or in the learning industry, as you'd like to call it. And what we offer actually 3 types. So the solution we offer it has 3 pillars, and one, which I think is a very important one, is our authoring solution. The authoring tool, for people that are not aware with e-learning, an authoring tool is a tool you use to create e-learning modules, right? So imagine if you want to create a presentation, you probably use Keynote or PowerPoint. If you want to create an e-learning, you create an authoring tool. And FlowSparks happens, of course, to have one of the best authoring tools out there. That's cool. The second pillar is that we are also offering a learning management system. A learning management system you can see as this is the platform where, if you're working in a company, you need to do digital trainings or e-learnings. This is the platform that you log into, and that recognizes you as a person, like, oh, hi, welcome, Nico. These are the trainings you need to do. These are the mandatory ones. These are the ones that, if you want to, that you can follow, but you're not obligated to do it. And this system will also do the tracking, right? Keeping all the reports, like, okay, which trainings have you done? Which trainings you still need to do? Did you pass the tests? Yes or no? So that's what, in general, a learning management system does, right? And then and that's a very important pillar as well, because if I hook back to my hurdles and your question that you just asked me, is the service department, right? So we grew into a software company, but before, in the past, we used to be a service company. So basically, our focus back then was not selling software, where, as we do today, people can create their own online trainings, but we used to make online trainings as a living, right? So imagine if I hop back to my previous example, a safety manager of a big production plant, they would contact us and they say, okay, we want to give a training about, let's say, working at height. These are all the documents. We need the training in 10 languages, right? So then what we would have done is, of course, analyzing the contents, and it's in collaboration with the customer, of course, but we would create that e-learning for them and deliver it on a project basis. That's what we've always done. But whilst launching the authoring tool and the learning management system, we've seen that services are, for our customers, I think, as important as the tools itself. Maybe there's a small link to my previous quote from a tool with a fool. A fool with a tool is still a fool. Sorry. No, I think because some companies, it depends a bit on the vision of the company. Some companies will say, okay, we need tools and we want to do everything ourselves. Fine, but then maybe in the beginning they need some guidance, right? They need some. Someone guiding them along that journey, training them, consulting them on what are best practices to do, etc. Some companies have the entire opposite vision, right? They say, oh, it's not our core, we want to outsource it, but we still want to have a tool to do maintenance, because as we've talked a lot about how fast everything's evolving, and the same, of course, is happening with knowledge. So if you build a training today, probably in a couple of months, and especially in a couple of years, the training will be outdated. So someone needs to be able to update it, right? And that's what we've seen, is that the majority of the companies is in neither categories, right? It's somewhere in between. Because it depends a bit on the size of the training they want to build, right? If it's a really big one and there are a lot of eyes from higher management on it, sometimes they say, okay, we get budgets and we want to have it done by professionals. We buy some extra resources by giving it to another party, of course. But then for another training, it could be, oh, this is something we can do locally. We can reuse something. We can do it quick ourselves. Or it could even be in collaboration. So these services we're called FlowSparks. It stands for Flexible Learning in an Online World. So of course, it applies to the tool. I think that's quite logical. But it also applies to how we see services. So the services for customer A, B, or C could be really different. It would be actually adjusted to the needs that they have. And then, okay, what makes our tool so special? Because I think that's the last part that everyone, I think, needs to hear. We've been talking a little bit about some details that are really linked to how we see the creation of e-learning materials. Is that what we've done is we've incorporated in our tool what we call learning formats, and they're basically sort of templates with embedded instructional design. So there are some proven recipes, let's say, and how to transfer knowledge or how to reach specific outcomes. Let's say you want to drill knowledge, could be a goal. It could also be, no, we want to create awareness if it's about risks or security. Or maybe the goal is just, oh no, we want to put people in context, right? My same example as previous. It's a good thing to know the rules, but if you're in a situation, what do you do?
Indeed.
So the context is also, and we've got these templates because this guides people without this expertise about knowledge transfer in what is a good way of, like you said, right, presenting this information to make it effective. And instead of giving a long text with rules and things you need to remember by heart. And we've had these learning formats, again, making it really easy for everyone to create content, because that's a bit our goal. We want to have everything, even AI, right? It's just a tool to reach that destination. The goal should be everyone should be able to create effective online trainings and share their know-how, right? And then, of course, we're human beings, we sometimes, especially in Belgium, we assume that everyone speaks English, but that's not already the case.
No.
Not always the case. So languages is a very important one. Localization of content, because the content, sometimes nuances need to change depending on cultures, locations. Regulations could be different when you talk about safety. So just translating is not always the solution. Sometimes it's translating and localizing. How do you do this very effectively? How do you make sure it works on all devices? And how can you make sure that it's updatable?
Yeah.
Because again, what we've seen, because we've always been an agency creating content, right?
Yeah.
At some point you see customers coming back, oh, this needs to change and this needs, and at some point they have so much content that from a day-to-day basis, things need to be updated. And we saw in the past that this process was just crazy, how inefficient it was in doing this. And that's something we took into account when we built our own tool, of course. And how can we do this in a better and a more agile way, so that we skip all the manual handling, right? Just an update should be easy. Updating, press save, and it's pushed to all the system that's using that training. That's what happened. So I think that's in general. I can talk about the company for hours, but I don't want
I assume,
I think that's in general what we do. So we offer the software and the services when it comes to digital trading.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and then your hurdles, right?
Yeah. Love to see what happens. Well, you've mentioned a couple. You've mentioned a couple that you've noticed as a service company, because I'm going to tell the listeners honestly, I've worked with FlowSparks with their team, and it's one of the strongest points that you understand what is needed and then implement it into a tool. So that's amazing how you've seen those hurdles with other companies or companies that you've worked with as customers, that's a hurdle that really needs to be broken through. And the same thing with recreating, updating stuff. It's a pain. I also have trainings running for my own for customers, and I noticed as well I need to update a couple of videos, and I've noticed by myself, like, damn, I have to redo the whole video. Oh no. And then you have to redo it, but then it's going to change. So you don't feel confident that it's going to be okay and stuff like that. If you have that in a company and somebody who is already kind of put on the brake, let's put it that way, of creating e-learnings, and then he has to update them every so often, it's painful. If you can create an e-learning in a certain construction that you say, oh, we only have to update the texts, and you talk a very neutral language, but still, engage the listener or the people that are following it. That's the strategy that I've noticed that you guys also use, explaining that, make it neutral, but then changeable for the future. Now, specifically to your own experiences within the industry, within FlowSparks, within your role, what are the other hurdles that you've noticed that might be interesting to know?
Yeah, when it comes more to my let's say the company in general, and not so much on what we offer to a client, like what does the product offer for a client. I think, well, it's important to go back, because as you've mentioned, and by the way, that was correct, right? Our company is a bit older than the 11 years that I've been there. The company was founded in the 1990s already. So I was still I'm from 87, so I was still
we won't mention the word, but you were there.
I was still a small child. Yeah. So, but the company was founded back then already with the idea of being an e-learning agency, and e-learning would change the world. I still believe all credits to the founder at that time. It was very ambitious and a very visionary to go in that direction. Maybe a bit too early. Time to market is always a thing. It's maybe a bit too early. But we've had, and I think people who have followed our company, because we used to be called You and I Learning, we were not called FlowSparks at that time, who followed our company over the years will have noticed that we were not really the success at some point that we are today. We were a traditional agency, and when I entered the company, we weren't doing really good. Because I've told you already, we're a listed company, so everyone can look it up. So it makes no sense on hiding this information. So it is what it is, right? We weren't doing good. And then I entered the company, and I remember, and I think that's important, because that's one of my struggles, let's say, for myself, is that, of course, from an academic background, I'm an engineer, so I'm not the typical, let's say, sales profile that you would see in e-learning companies specifically. I don't think so. Exactly. So at some point, I chose, I'm an engineer. I studied at university in Ghent. Very interesting and all that, right? And I really enjoyed my studies, and I recommend it to everyone who's more interested in technology and, of course, mathematics. A lot of mathematics, by the way. But at some point, I did ask myself, what do I want to do in the future, right? Do I want to be an engineer? And I really struggled with that as a person in the beginning. I already started struggling with it actually during my studies, but then at some point I decided I'll just finish it and I'll see afterwards what I do. First job was a little bit more related to engineering, and then I was in contact with our former, back then, general manager at UNI Learning, which I knew at that point personally. My father at that time was the CEO of UNI Learning. So for me, so the general manager tried to convince me to start there. He said, I really believe you're a salesperson. We need strong sales because we're struggling in the market. We have a hard time selling our value, explaining what we do different compared to competitors, because it's a bit the same. And if you have someone who's doing, let's say someone who can do your garden, right? They can create a new garden for you, fine. But then if you have another one, it's hard for him to explain, why would I do it better than the other one? Because it's custom, right? It's tailored to your needs. So, and we had the same issue. So in the end, as I'm here today, he did convince me to start there. I think for me,
clearly,
that was a real big struggle for me, because I always, I don't know why, maybe I was too proud or whatever. I didn't want to work in a company where my father was working as well. That was for me, that was something that really blocked me to make that decision at first.
Okay.
In the end, I did go for it. It was struggling. I can tell you that a lot is expected from you if you're the son of the CEO. No, I was lucky though to be in sales, which is of course a very transparent role. I had targets just like any other sales, so there was no way of hiding or getting benefits because I was the son of, right? So, but that, I think for me, that was a personal struggle in the beginning. Getting that appreciation from colleagues. I'm not saying I've never felt people judging me or anything, right? But for yourself, you do feel I need to perform, I need to overperform, which in the end I did. But it was a lot of hard work, finding a good balance with your private life, of course.
Skipping into that, sorry to interrupt, but can I see your dad as still being kind of a guide or a mentor in the whole story, that what you're running?
Well, in some way he is, of course. We're 11 years later now, so I think at that point, yes. Now still, by the way, right? But it's different because, of course, I've evolved a lot as well. And I think
absolutely
11 years ago, if people would tell you how much you would change, you don't believe it. But in reality, it is, right? You change as a person, you evolve, you learn new things. You overcome certain things, you experience failure as well sometimes, maybe, but you learn from it. So it did change me a lot. But of course, it's still a person. It's my dad, right? So I can still go back to him if I have questions, if I don't know what to do, it's something I try to evade a little bit. I don't want to do it every day, because we're still a family, right? And I've got a sister, I've got a niece, a nephew, I've got my own kids. So it's not like we're together that we're always talking about.
Indeed. That would be too much. Yeah.
But that's a big struggle when you're working closely together, though. Because it's in the beginning, of course, I was not, because I was one of the sales reps and I wasn't really working closely together. But as I grew into the company, that started to get more, strangled to each other, right? So private life and work was actually one big thing at some point. So it was a bit of a struggle, but again, like you just said as well, I've learned a lot from it. So I definitely look back at it with a positive view. So it's not like I have bad memories about how it
Would
went.
you say that having somebody, okay, now in your case it's really your dad who's kind of really close at home. I also work directly with my partner, who's my VA. So it is a very strange dynamic, sitting at the table in the evening and so, oh, did you do that for me? And wait, hold on, is it private or is it business? I'm like, oh yeah, we're eating. No business here. But yeah, it's an kind of awkward situation. But is it something that you would advise somebody who's growing within a company to have somebody who's a kind of a guide or a mentor or somebody who helps them?
Definitely. But I guess it doesn't always need to be one person, though, right? If I look back at my career, for instance, I've had different guides or mentors. Of course, my father, but also some of my colleagues that are now, for instance, in our group management, and even friends, right? This could be friends with a similar, but also with a very different career path. I believe it's always interesting to reflect and discuss how people with a different point of view of things look at certain problems or challenges that you face in your career. So I guess in general, there's just not one formula for success. When I look back at the journey of our company, and of course also my part in it, focus, hard work, and dedication seem to be a good start, right? For example, I was not always the best salesperson, but I did end up with the best results. And that's not the same, right? Now, when working in a company where your father is the CEO, you do, of course, have that feeling to overperform. It's pressure you put on yourself, but it's also the pressure you get, of course, from your dad in this case, right? So I had, for instance, no excuse for anything when it came to work. But in the end, I learned a lot from it, and it made me into who I am today. So I definitely look back at it positively, right? It pushed me to get over the struggles we had at that time, especially the time when I started in our company, because we were doing exactly the same as maybe 4 or 5 competitors out there in our markets then. Of course, we said we did it better, right? But they probably said the same. But how and why? So the main struggle back then was, how do we differentiate ourselves? And how do we make what we sell more concrete for customers? Because we were selling tailor-made e-learning, right? So it was something hard for some of our customers to really understand and to really see what they were buying, as at that moment, of course, it hadn't been developed yet, right? So what I did is I started analyzing our audience, which of course traditionally were learning and development managers, learning training departments of big companies. But then I saw that we'd done a lot of projects around safety. That it's not a coincidence that I've chosen safety managers a couple of times as an example. What I saw there is that we could create a second audience, safety managers, that had a specific need where we could offer a solution. Think of safety inductions for contractors or employees, refreshment trainings about working at height, and so on. So this was basically, I guess this was one of our first steps towards selling a solution in the form of a semi-predefined product. Back then we called it a safety challenge and on a safety platform, which is today our FastPass, by the way. So in this case, e-learning was not the goal, but it was a tool to reach a goal, right? So our first step into selling a product instead of 100% tailor-made e-learning content, right? And this made us experiment also in other niches, because of course safety is one of the niches we targeted. One of the other ones that we worked on was product trainings for sales reps, for instance, because we know sales reps need to be trained in product knowledge, but also in positioning of the product, etc. And one of the customers back then was Omega Pharma, a big pharmaceutical company that we had here in Belgium back then. And they wanted to have different sales trainings with a lot of information about the product, how to sell the product, how to position the product, in their case, in pharmacists, etc. So very focused specifically on their content, of course, because it were their products, their way of selling it, and their way of course, positioning it. So that part was tailored, right? But we tried to develop a certain frame around it, right? So that it could be used for different product lines and different cases to be used within their company. And of course, it didn't take long before they said, okay, this went well, this went really well. I think we got very positive feedback and they loved it. But then suddenly, of course, we started getting questions because marketing had, for instance, made changes. So these changes needed to be applied into all these e-learnings. And back then, with the technology we were using and that was available back then, it wasn't that easy because what seemed like a very small change, in which they probably thought this is something you can do like in 5 minutes, in reality was not the case. It was way more work than most people anticipated that it would be. And secondly, of course, there was also the entire process, right? The customer needs to define what needs to be changed. We need to scope it, bring out an offer. They need to approve. We need to put it in our planning. They need to review and approve again. So it takes way too much time. So at some point, of course, we got a very logical question for them. It's like, can't we do this ourselves? Isn't it possible that our marketing department can make these changes ourselves? Unfortunately, back then, theoretically the case is always yes, but it was hard. You needed specific expertise in certain areas. You needed to have the correct technology in place to be able to do this. But this moment, this rang the bell. This was a bit the hallelujah moment because it wasn't, of course, the first time we got this question, but this is a certain moment that I guess a lot of people in our company still remember. Like, this is something we need to work on. We need to find a solution to this. But of course, business as usual kept on going. And later I got promoted to sales and marketing manager for Belgium, bringing, of course, extra struggles into the game, as now I had a team to manage. I needed to also think about our marketing efforts with back then, of course, very small budgets. And then actually something important happened, right? In 2016, a product was co-developed with a customer that we had back then in the Netherlands. That product was basically the base for what FlowSparks is today. And when some colleagues and I saw that product, we thought, wow, instead of only using this internally for developing projects again, right? Why not sell this? Because this is something that our customers could really use. And we were thinking back on examples like the Omega Pharma case I just talked about, right? And basically, FlowSparks was born. Of course, I'm skipping a lot of steps here, but the idea of FlowSparks was born. And this made us, I would say that this made us a startup within an existing company. So we weren't a real startup, we were a startup within an existing company, which had some upsides and of course also some downsides, right? When I look back at the upsides, I think we had experienced people, right? We had a network, we had an organization, we had knowledge about the market and other tools, right? But the downside was that we were way less agile than a startup because we needed to maintain our existing business, right? We couldn't neglect it. Things needed to keep on going there as well. And at some point there was even, and that was interesting, by the way, there was an article in Trends, which is a magazine in Belgium. And I think it had a title something like, "You and I Learning is cannibalizing its own market," right? And this is, and I want to jump ahead here to one of the struggles we had internally, right? Because we were an e-learning agency and suddenly we were going to sell a product saying everyone would be able to create e-learning. So you can imagine that not everyone in our company immediately embraced the idea, as the expertise of building e-learning was the job of our people, right? So, of course, I always believed, and I'm happy in the end that I was correct, that this was not going to be the case, right? It's not like people were going to lose their jobs, that customers would do everything themselves. It ended up completely different because the result was actually the opposite of what some people may have expected back then. And in the end, we became more partners instead of suppliers to our customers, bringing in more, but of course also sometimes different work to our agency, right? But the change was a struggle for us, and it took time and especially some successes in the market to get everyone in the company on board and get them over that change of what we were doing back then, right? And then we launched, of course, FlowSparks. Yeah, I haven't mentioned it yet. So development was done, co-production with a customer in 2016. We launched very carefully, again, as we need to make sure our existing business was still there. in 2017, right? And then, of course, as we started growing and as the company and I matured in 2021, I became the CCO of the company, and we changed the name of the company from You and I Learning to FlowSparks. And then in my new role, I think back then my primary objective and struggle, of course, was to start professionalizing and optimizing our sales to get us ready for internationalization, right? Because the main struggle there for me was, if I look back now, was to learn and accept that not everyone looks at work and their career the same way, right? Because we were hiring more and more people, we needed bigger sales teams, and I learned that I could not expect the same unconditional devotion from everyone as I was used to from some of my colleagues that were there from the beginning and the entire journey and even are still there today. And then in Q4 2023, I stepped into the role of the CEO, where one of my current struggles is growth. And not only growth locally in Belgium and the Netherlands, but also growth internationally, of course.
It's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. You know, your company is growing in its own pace, in its own story. And I found it amazing that actually those roots are still there. You know, the initial service-minded environment, you know, supplying those services to your customers, and then evolving into what I found very intriguing is you have been answering the questions or the hurdles of your customers in building FlowSparks, in building the software package, in that pillar, let's say, and then of course the actual creation story where you have the audit. I forgot the name. The auditing software.
Authoring tool, yeah.
The authoring tool. Sorry, yeah. I use it, and I don't know the name. It's very interesting, you know.
You know FlowSparks. That's the most important part.
I use an Apple. That's something. I don't remember the name of the device, but yeah, it's true that the evolution of the company goes towards answering the questions of the customers, and then internally you find those struggles that people, oh no, change, my God, I'm going to lose. No, you're as a human being, we are very adaptable. I've seen this in a lot of companies as well. I've been in 15 years in IT environment, and if you remember the year 2000, I was just after that, you know, starting first line support. I used to do cabling before that. I was a cabling engineer, you know, really running around. You remember those old ceilings where you had to push up the tiles and move them away, and then you found dead rats? I did that, actually. So I've been there. But as you see in IT, in the beginning, everything was new, and a lot of people are scared, even opening a Word. You know, it's an application that you open up and you start typing in. They were used to, you know, the old ticking machines. And then they were saying, what's the difference? You know, I like it on paper, but now I have to do it on the screen and then print it again and hold those discussions. But in the end, people get used to it and they start using it as a daily tool. And it's the same thing with what you're saying, is that you're answering actually a certain need from people in a certain way, and then internally finding those struggles, but overcoming them with those teams. And what I see in my experience with working with you guys is that service is still there. That's still the red wire, as we say, in the company, of supplying that service. Now, as you're expanding, and that's kind of a question that I tend to ask to a lot of companies, how will you keep that same service alive if you're, you know, expanding? Because that's difficult.
It is, and it's something we started thinking about when we first started thinking about internationalization of the company. So I think we started putting more efforts in scaling the company. I think in 2021, I think mostly really started, you know, implementing new things in 2022 though. But 2021, I think we said, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to find other markets and via different options, and I'll get to that later. But indeed, and one of the first questions that we ask ourselves is, okay, we're doing really good on customer support coaching. We've got, so every customer of FlowSparks gets what we call a customer success coach.
Yeah.
So it's basically a consultant, right? It's adding a face to the product It's the person as a customer that you can contact, someone that knows your vision on learning, the way you've implemented the product, they've guided you through implementation, training, but also the person that supports you along the journey as the customer.
Yeah.
So you can tell it's a personal connection that we want to keep with the customer. We don't want to be a 100% tool only, right?
Yeah.
So we've seen that from our experience in the past, but also from the feedback we got from our customers, is that service is super important. Because if you want to have an issue, you want to know who to call. You want to have someone that can guide you, can consult you. But also, and what I've said before, is that some customers sometimes also don't have the time and resources to do it themselves, and they want to fall back to a company that can help them. Which in Belgium and the Netherlands is something we do on our own, right? So we've been thinking about how can we scale this, and indeed, it's a hard question, because scaling, of course, you can open offices in all countries and hire people. But it's not
very
very
realistic, of course.
It's not that realistic. It would be very expensive as well, I guess.
Especially that.
Also, it would take a very long time, because these customer success coaches need to know the product very well, and so it requires time to get to that level of knowledge as well. So we started thinking of some things. So what we've done is, for instance, we've got a members environment where you can find a lot of assets, digital trainings, guides, tips and tricks about the product. That's all digital, what I'm saying now. We've started building communities by organizing events. We call them a degustatiedag in Belgium, or a taste of learning in other countries, where we bring customers and sometimes also prospects together. We let customers share their cases, how they use the tool, but with real life applications on what problem did it solve in your company? How did you organize it? So we don't expect them to explain why the tool is good. We expect them to explain, how did you use the tool? And how did you organize everything around it? Because launching trainings, how did you make people aware of the training? What are the results? Can you measure it? So all these things, they share that with their peers, which is really interesting also for us, by the way, to be there.
Yeah, of course.
That's something we're doing locally, but also more and more abroad. And how we do that abroad is mostly by a partner network that we're building. So we've got partners in different countries: UK, US, Germany, France, South Africa. So we've got Finland also, I think, is a new partner that joined us end of last year. So partners in different markets. Why? Because if we're getting clients there, and it could also be a local division of a client that we've made in another country, it's also possible. And we've seen that culture, language can make a big difference, right? For the tool, not so much, but for the services, very much, right? And that's how we're doing it today. Our coaches here, we've got some dedicated coaches here that are actually training people there. These people can do implementing your entire environment, but also giving you the coaching, the support, delivering services to you in that market.
So that's kind of an amazing strategy to tackle in that way. So you're actually basically creating partnerships that are extensions of your own environment.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, it is, right. So these are e-learning agencies. They have the knowledge on delivering these types of services. We just need to learn them. What is FlowSparks? How does it work? And the cool thing is, right, just like us, because they're very experienced in all the things that can happen and all the difficult questions you could get. And then they immediately see, wow, with FlowSparks, you've thought about this. And I think that was one of the pluses in my previous story, is that if we were a 100% startup, maybe we wouldn't have had all that knowledge to put into the tool.
Of course, that was a whole package that you could take with you in your story. But it's wonderful to hear how you guys are tackling the expansion in a very, very unique way. I wouldn't say it as maybe other companies that do the same thing, expanding with partnerships and so on. So we're kind of end of our conversation here, and I got two more questions I really want to ask you, Cédric. So, what is the everlasting legacy that FlowSparks aims to leave in the industry?
In the industry, I would say that we aspire to be the company that like I already said, I think during this podcast, that changed the way we looked at creating online trainings. We had a different look to it, a different process of creating e-learning. It's a bit different than other tools, and not so much in features, but in how we look at building something.
Yeah.
We should be the company that, is remembered as the one that started, I wouldn't say a movement because it could happen, but you know what I mean? Like that creating online learning shouldn't only be for experts in learning. Yeah. Everyone should be able to create effective training modules using the latest technologies, right? Yeah. And the tool would need to make it easy, even if the newer technologies are very complex things like AI or stuff. For the user, it needs to be integrated so they can easily use high-end technology in the backend without them being very technical. I think that's what, for me, I think the legacy would be that I would leave behind in our industry or in the world in general.
Yeah, I would support that, because that's indeed some of the things that makes it a little bit easier as well for the people who are in the L&D department of an HR department within a company, to make it a long sentence. But that usually they always come to the same group of people saying, we need another e-learning, or we need an update, or did that. And what you're saying is the people can do it themselves. And that's a lot more interesting, because then they can actually say, hey, hold on, we need to do this quickly because we have a new update that has to be done. And if they have to go through, and in companies 500, 1,000 plus employees, you know how the processes work. It's slow. It has, everybody needs to, give the agreement and so on. If somebody can decide themselves and just implement, there's risks as well. I know, you have to balance these things out. But in essence, if somebody has a tool that can do it for them, they can just update a video or a piece of text. It's a lot easier than going through the whole process of the company, and everybody needs to agree and so on. So that's amazing. That's a good future. Yeah.
To add to that, I think it's like I said, right? I think this way individuals could share their know-how, but it remains within the guidelines of the company. I don't want to go into the details of how the tool works, but I guess you already know. But it remains within the guidelines of the company. So you give them that freedom to do something themselves. And the cool thing is that learning and development, just like you said, right? And sometimes I see this even at very big companies, right? You have an L&D team. If you compare it to the user population, it's so small. And they get all these questions from business, like, oh, we want an e-learning for this and for this. But for those people, it's at some point it becomes impossible to answer all these needs or demands from the business. So what I'm aiming for is that, let's call them the central learning and development team. Of course, it depends on the company on how they're organized, but the central learning and development team should be the internal coach, helping the business to be able to create their own content, guiding them if necessary, providing them with the good tools, the good feedback. I think that could make, and we've seen some cases of companies doing them. It's just crazy how much content they're able to produce. It's even we as an agency are not able to produce that much in 1 year. It's so many people to do that, and
that's inspirational, huh?
Yeah, it's really
somewhere, and then the inspiration starts running, and then you think, I've noticed myself, we started implementing the whole story recently, and now suddenly people are saying, oh, we could put it that, and so the basic procedure documents that you would say, I would never put that in any form of learning. We just sent a document. We're saying, well, if we put it in there, we can split it up, and people can search for interesting passages. It's like, oh, okay, that's a good one. And it lives in a certain way and evolves in a certain way. So that's amazing. Yeah.
And now with AI, it's only getting better, right? Now, if you have these documents, you could ask AI, or you've created a couple of learning elements, right? Probably a little more text-based and images. But you could say, okay, well, now we've got these documents translated into some learning nuggets or whatever you like to call them. Well, make me an exercise. Give me a couple of scenarios someone needs to work on. Applying this information, and AI could generate it for you in, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. You just adapt it. It's still AI, right? Adapt it a little.
Of course, your own sauce.
Probably you'll do something half an hour, and we've got integrations with machine translation companies, and if you want to, you can translate it to 20 languages as well. You can all do it within an hour, right?
Yeah, indeed.
You need to build that yourself and work with agencies. Yeah, you've probably done it in the past. You're talking about days, weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 25,000 different discussions for one word, because it's nuanced in that way or reduced in that, and that's it makes a lot easier. I got one more final question, which is a more personal question, on your own legacy. Of course, we're talking about the future here and what can impact. So, what is one thing that you would like the very last listener of this podcast episode to remember about you in the future?
About me.
I love difficult questions, of course.
That's a difficult question because you're saying one. That makes it hard. Otherwise, you can. Well, I'll answer a little bit more freely. I think a couple of things, but they're all related to each other. I think I've said it somewhere before. I think focus and dedication. I strongly believe that these are key elements to success. If I look back at my own career, which of course results in working hard. I strongly believe that working hard in a smart way, of course. Not everywhere. The way to go. And I think something that is popping up right now, as we've discussed a lot, and I love the dynamics throughout the conversation, by the way, is don't be afraid of change, right? Because if I look back, whether it's personal, right? So I'm an engineer, so I'm a more technical, educated person, right? So I'm not the typical sales profile, let's say. But at some point I did jump and I said, okay, I'm going to try this. Even if it didn't work out the way that like it did in the end, because I've got a friend who did the same, where he went back to what he originally did. But why not, right? He tried it. Otherwise, his entire life, he would have asked himself, I should have tried it. It's not for me. Yeah. Why not, right? So I think personally, business-wise, we've talked a lot about that part, right? We were a service company changing into a software company. It was a big change for us, for the team, but also for us as a company to position ourselves to go to the market. It's a big difference. And then also in terms of products, because don't be afraid to do it different, because we have a very different approach. Combine our tool to let's say traditional altering tools. And it's a big change, maybe also for people knowing tool A and coming to FlowSparks. But from now, I'm very positive to say that most people have been very happy with what they've seen on how it could be different and how it could maybe be more agile and efficient for them.
Well, it's one of the things that I've noticed in all my coachings and guidances and mentorships is I find a lot of people, high achieving, very thriving people who are actually really scared of change. We've always done it this way, so we're going to do it in the future that way. And my hair, like we say in Dutch, my hair comes up in my neck. Like, no, change is, the universe exists because of change. There's nothing else that's there than change. And every time we go into those discussions, and of course I ask them these wonderful questions of why are you afraid of blah, blah, blah. And the discussion ends up into the points of why not? It really ends up into that. Why don't you try it? You never know what's going to happen. It might be amazing. It might be a disaster. But the only thing that you're going to get out of it is knowing the answer to why not.
If I look back at my own journey, right, because it's also what made everything interesting. Because as you said in the beginning, right, 11 years, and especially concerning my age, is a long time. But, technically I've been working at the same company. Yeah, it's the same VAT number, right? It's the same company. But it's not really the same company, right? You can't compare the company we are today with the company that I started in 2012, right? So it's a huge difference. All the changes we've had along that journey has made it interesting for me. Probably kept me in the company as well. And I'm quite sure if I look at some of my direct colleagues that are in our group management team, some of them have been there. Most of them, by the way, have been there from the beginning, even longer than me. Some of them. It's just awesome to see how everything everyone has grown into what we are today. Because for them, it must have also been a very big change, right? Because even if you're working in, let's say, our CFO, or you're working in our CTO, for him, the change was huge. Before we were new in the company as an agency, well, now we have our own product that needs to be maintained. It needs to work. It's being used all over the world. And the challenges that we face were also completely different. But I'm not afraid of change. Personally, I really embrace it. I love change. It makes things interesting.
Yeah, life would be boring, wouldn't it be?
From my perspective, yes. But okay,
mine as well.
Not everyone can be the same, of course. But from my perspective, I think for me it would be boring. The moment everything would remain the same and would not change, I'm quite sure I would get bored.
I agree.
But with all new technologies popping up, I'm quite sure it will happen. It will change.
Well, okay. Well, thank you very much, Cédric, for your time.
With pleasure.
And
thank you for having me, by the way.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Absolutely. I hope to see you in the future. I follow you on LinkedIn, and I find it amazing what you guys are doing. I support you guys in every step of the way, because an innovative company needs to be supported by everybody. So, I hope that in the next couple of years, FlowSparks, booms so much that I might be re-inviting you to my podcast to tell us about what's happened in that time.
Yeah, I hope so too. And we're working on the internationalization. So again, a lot will change. So I'm quite sure you will be able to come up with a lot of new questions next time you meet up.
I'll have to dig deeper into the difficult ones, but it'll be fine.
Great. No, thank you so much, Nico, for having me here. It was actually really nice chatting, and I love that it was not just question and answer, but it was more a dynamic conversation. Very fun.
Thank you very much, and lots of luck out there.
Thank you so much. Same to you, man, with the podcast. Take care.
Thank you, everybody, for listening once again to the podcast. And as we say, continue, be successful.
If you haven't done so, hit that subscribe button so you will never miss another episode.